Welcome to the December 17th, 2013 City of Troy Zoning Board of Appeals meeting. Those of you that are coming in, if you're interested in a hard copy of the agenda, they are outside on a stand. Feel free to pick one up. Before we get started, we're going to give a brief rundown of just how the board normally functions when we hear cases. We do have an unusual hitch tonight, and I'll go into that discussion just after I go through our normal description of activities. The Board of Zoning Appeals is a group of 7 of your neighbors or peers appointed by City Council to pass judgment on requests for variances and other matters that are brought before them. A variance is a relaxation of the literal provisions of the zoning ordinance. Petitioners must indicate a hardship or practical difficulty running with the land that would warrant the granting of the variance. As far as our procedures, the board will hear the items in the order that they appear on the agenda. When an item is called, the chairman will verify that the petitioner is present. Then the city administration will summarize the facts of the case. The petitioner will then be given an opportunity to address the board to explain the justification for the action requested. After the petitioner makes their presentation and answers any questions that the board may have, the chairman will open a public hearing. Any person wishing to speak on the request can come forward by raising their hand, and once they're at the podium, they just merely need to provide their name and their address. And from that point, they can also then indicate what the relationship is to the property, such as an adjoining property, or you're just an interested citizen wanting to make a comment. At that point, you should state whether they are in favor or against the variance request and give reasons for their opinion. Comments must be directed through the chairman, and comments should be kept as brief as possible and closely pertain to the matter under consideration. During this activity, only one person will be recognized by the chairman to speak at one time. In the interest of time, we often limit the speaking of any one particular party. Generally, we work with a 3-minute rule, and tonight we'll be doing that, and we track the time and will allow you to have an opportunity to speak, and we'll give you notice as to when your time is about to expire. At the conclusion of the public comments, the chairman will close the public hearing. Once the public hearing is closed, no other public comment will be taken unless in response to a specific question by a member of the board. The board will then make a motion to deny, approve, or table, which means delay, the request. In order for the request to pass, a minimum of 4 votes for approval are needed. Now, if the request is not granted, the applicant has the right to appeal the board's decision to the Oakland County Circuit Court. Well, that's our normal procedures that we follow. However, we do have a problem, and for that I'd like to apologize on behalf of the city. We do have a technical issue that occurred which affects basically the last paragraph of the procedures that I read tonight. What happens is through our graphic information service systems and our information technology, we notify in advance all adjoining properties within 300 feet of any one particular property in which a petition for a zoning change is required. Well, in this particular case, we realized that every item on the agenda, items 4B, C, and D, were not properly notified. With that being the case, we can go ahead and have a meeting, but the rules are such that will not allow us to make a final decision on any of the cases that we're going to discuss tonight. However, instead of canceling a meeting and not allowing public comment when those of you may have turned out to speak on an issue, we are going to have a meeting, and we're going to operate in the following manner. We will go up to the point where we would return the matter to discussion before the board and then perhaps take a vote on an issue. At that point, we will be tabling all items, and we will then be able to conduct proper notification to all adjoining property owners within 300 feet. And next month, on January 21st, items 4B, 4C, and 4D will then be brought back up for final discussion and then a vote. What this may mean to you is that you have an opportunity to speak tonight, and you could have an opportunity to speak next month. And with that being the case, that is unfortunately in order with the laws that we operate under, we're going to have to operate tonight. If that's a disappointment to anybody, I completely apologize, but unfortunately this is the way we'll have to operate. And having said that, I would like to move forward into the normal agenda and to take a roll call for the board. Paul, can you call the roll?
Mr. Bloomingdale.
Here.
Mr. Clark.
Here.
Mr. Courtney.
Here.
Mr. Eisenbacher.
Here.
Mr. Neal.
Here.
Mr. Krent.
Here.
Mr. Lambert.
Here.
We have a full board.
Thank you. Agenda item 2, approval of minutes for the November 19, 2013 meeting. Are there any questions or comments from the board regarding the agenda minutes as printed? And if not, is there anyone willing to make a motion to have the minutes approved?
Move the approval.
Can I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Mr. Evans, can you call the question on that?
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Courtney.
Yes.
Mr. Eisenbacher.
Yes.
Mr. Neal.
Yes.
Mr. Krent.
Yes.
Mr. Lambert.
Yes.
Mr. Bloomingdale.
Yes.
Agenda item 3, approval of the agenda. I would note at this point that item 4A, which actually is a carryover from last month, the applicant has requested to pull their application, so we will not be hearing anything on that particular case. So that is an agenda item that we are going to change. With that being said, is there anything from a board member or staff regarding further adjustments to the agenda? Seeing none, I'm going to move into item 4, which is the hearing of cases. We'll go to item 4B. Mr. Evans, can you give us the normal workup on that particular matter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to direct everybody's attention to the overheads where we've provided an aerial of the neighborhood. For our first case, Case B, which is a variance request, the applicant is Marvin Pisarczyk for Witzenman, USA. Now, the request covers 2 properties, 1201 and 1305 Stevenson Highway. As printed in the agenda, the request is in order to construct, in addition to both buildings that will connect the buildings, a 10-foot variance to the required minimum 10-foot side yard setback. This variance is needed for both properties. If I could again direct everybody's attention to the overheads, I provided an aerial of the neighborhood. The subject properties are outlined in red in the middle of the screen. The subject properties are located on the east side of Stevenson, south of East Maple Road. Now I've zoomed in a little bit on the aerial and overlaid in colors zoning classifications for the subject property and surrounding properties. Now the subject property, which is overlaid in gray, along with the property to the south and the west, is zoned integrated industrial business. The purple overlay that we see to the north and across the street on Stevenson is zoned research center. Now I've zoomed in closer on the properties to give everyone an idea of the general configuration. The subject matter is going to be the yellow line that separates the properties. That's the side lot line. The applicant has provided us a site plan which will highlight what they want to do. And in this site plan here, Stevenson Highway is on our right. We have the building to the south, which is 1201 Stevenson, the building to the north, which is 1305 Stevenson. This dashed line is the side property line dividing both properties. This black or dark section here is that they want to construct in a proposed addition, a tunnel-like structure to connect the buildings. Now this addition is 14 feet wide and spans about 62 feet and will connect the buildings. Now the result of what they're proposing, any additions to either of these buildings would have to be no closer than 10 feet to this common side property line. By straddling, in effect, they're going to have a 0-foot setback where a 10-foot side yard setback is required. So with that, I'll turn it back over to the board for any questions.
Thank you. Would the applicant please come forward? Thank you. If you state your name and your relationship, and you feel free at this point to then now make any presentation you'd like and additional information you'd want us to know.
Thank you, members of the board. My name is Jonathan Martone. Good evening. I represent Witzeman, and with me here today is Marvin Pisarczyk, employed by Witzeman, as well as the individual who submitted the actual variance request. I certainly, for the sake of brevity, don't intend to belabor all the points that we had outlined in our application, but I believe there are a few salient matters I would like to raise again tonight. By brief background, Witzeman is a company that enjoys a rich 125-year-plus history. Its location here in Troy, Michigan occurred over 3 years ago, and it currently occupies 2 buildings, 1201 and 1305 Stevenson Highway, and employs 152 people within the city of Troy. It's currently in the end stages of a long-term negotiation to lease a 3rd building that has been currently vacant for the past 8 years, also located in the city of Troy. It's a company that does continue to look for opportunities to invest here in the city. The particular variance request, as Mr. Evans had described, is a 10-foot setback variance, and it relates to what we call the proposed breezeway. This proposed structure is that it's a building, a breezeway that would provide for the more seamless transfer of materials and completed products between the 2 buildings. Witzeman is a manufacturer and designer of automotive supply parts, flexible metal hosing. As it currently stands, in order for Witzeman to transfer materials and products from one building to the next, it actually has to load products from the 1201 Stevenson Highway location, which lies to the south, drive out onto Stevenson Highway, make a Michigan left, head north onto Stevenson Highway, make a Michigan left again, and then park into the 1305 Stevenson Highway. In addition to this process just taking time and being costly in terms of man hours, it also increases unnecessarily congestion on the road, which may have adverse impact on safety issues. This breezeway would eliminate that, would allow for the seamless transition of those materials. The properties are subject to 2 long-term leases by Witzeman. The individual landlords have granted consent to this project. They have no problem with it. It increases the economic utility of these buildings, and as well resulting in an increase in the economic value of them and the ability to increase the rental rates. This particular breezeway, we believe, would not create any sort of harm to other adjacent property owners. It is set back over 300 feet, or approximately 300 feet from the roadway, so it's not going to be an eyesore, so to speak. Given the height variance between the top of the breezeway and the top of the actual building structures, it won't be such that the neighboring property owners would be able to visibly see this piece of property. And we believe that it's consistent with the character of the industrial zoned area. It would increase the property values and decrease the congestion on the road. For those reasons, as well as the reasons we set forth in our application, we would ask this board to consider granting our variance request. We do have some artist renderings of the building, so you get a better sense of the proportion as to the road and how far set back.
That's the current 1201 building, and then the, what we're proposing back here. Yep.
This is an artist rendering of how the actual breezeway will look. It will be aesthetically consistent with the tone and color of the bricks that go around, so it's not to stand out.
Closer view of it.
It would be consistent also with all other aspects of code and building requirements.
And that's actually, the windows are to the rear of the building.
The other thing is that we would have to be constructive.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
The only other thing, as Mr. Pisarcik had reminded me, there is a requirement with the property owners that at the end of the lease, should they not renew the lease, they would, at Witzeman's own cost, remove that structure. So that it's not necessarily going to be a permanent thing in the event that they do not continue their occupancy. That's obviously the hope and goal for this, but we wanted to at least bring that to your attention. We can answer any other questions at the appropriate time, should you have any.
Okay, we may have some, I have a few questions, and others may, and just to remind you, because we are operating somewhat unusual rules tonight, well, these questions can occur. What I mean by the discussion and deliberation of the board is once you guys are done and we've asked you questions and we bring it back to us, the deliberation that we would have in discussion, we just can't do tonight.
Certainly.
Having said that, just for orientation purposes, the ownership of the 2 buildings, you're a tenant in both, but is it the same ownership or separate parties?
It's separate parties. We do have consent from both owners.
Would your main point of access be 1201 now for both buildings? Because the reason I ask is that, are you making an adjustment to the parking lots because of the breezeway? I'm looking at the traffic flow on the site.
The main access would be just south of the 1201 building through that driveway on the south, right there, yes.
Okay. And I know this may not be something that you've had to approach yet. It's not within our domain to discuss, but for orientation purposes, it'd be useful for me to know is, has your discussions with the city, besides what you need to resolve here today and next month, has it also involved anything with the fire department? My question is have you heard anything from any of the parties in the city that are concerned about any sort of access from a safety point of view if, let's say, you had a fire? Your project may not have reached that point to have that
We
discussion.
haven't directly talked with the fire department. We did meet with some officials from the city just to
Okay.
understand what the process was.
Okay.
Both buildings are fully fire sprinkled and
Okay,
with
right.
security systems. As is the connecting building is also sprinkled,
Oh, it will be? Okay.
yes, with fire doors on each end.
Okay. Yeah, it was just general orientation questions for me. That's the only questions I have. Are there any additional questions for the applicants?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Can you elaborate on the amount of traffic that you're experiencing? How many trips a day?
We currently have a truck that we drive between, not these two locations right now, because we're just starting up the building to the north, but between our warehouse and we also have some plants in Warren. Yeah, we're a 24/7 operation, so this truck is continuously going around. The truck probably would stop at the 1201 building 3 times per shift, so 3 times in an 8-hour period. It's going to get fully loaded up and then, arrive or depart.
Specifically then, between the two buildings, you've got trucks going around and then back into the other one now, where this proposed breezeway is going to resolve that, or it takes traffic off of Stevenson.
Yes.
Those are the number of trips that I'm interested in. Do you have is it a continuous?
Yeah, right now, we're just starting to put the equipment into the 1305 building, so we really don't have a good feel, but really the materials from the 1201 building moved to the 1305 building for final processing.
Okay.
So it's going to be continuous.
Mr. Courtney?
Talk of the traffic on Stevenson that you're going to save is not really logical, because all you have to do is drive through the parking lot from one to the other. You don't have to go on Stevenson. You can have cross-access there. Now, that doesn't mean it makes it logical to load a truck and unload it that close together either, but I'm just saying traffic is not I don't think is a question, because you can avoid that.
One question I have for you, and I could not see the western parts of the site, where the parking lots end, is there any additional site work that you have to do to make the vehicle access from the southern property to the northern property acceptable for cars and vehicles?
There's no physical work that has to be done between the two
Is
properties.
there fencing or anything to be?
There is a fence, yes.
Okay. Is your intent to remove that fence or make an opening?
Just
or-
a section of the fence, enough
Okay.
so cars can get through it.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Additional question? Mr. Lambert?
Yes, so the real hardship that you are presenting us with is the fact that you have essentially 2 buildings that have different owners, but you have a common tenant. So you're trying to build this in order to facilitate the business operations of the common tenant?
That hardship, in addition to the fact that given that these subject properties are landlocked to the west by other tenants, it eliminates or diminishes the economic feasibility of putting on additions that would be sufficient to accommodate a company like Witzeman that has significant manufacturing processes. So it is the fact that, as a result, we're left with the situation that we would need to find 2 adjoining properties and then consider an opportunity like this.
So the real hardship then, since we're not allowed to look at economics, is the landlocked
Yes.
status of the
Yes.
property? Okay, thank you.
The third building that you mentioned that you're going to occupy, is it adjoining?
It's 1410 Allen, which is, we'll say, kind of kitty corner across the creek or whatever.
Okay, so it's
a
it's
drain.
not an adjoining prop per se, you're not, okay, I understand. Any
It's the
additional?
building that's highlighted in white, with the white area right
Oh, I see,
there.
I see.
And then we've also talked with the owners of the other 3 properties behind us, those right there, yes. So if those, potentially, the leases are available, we may consider those also.
Mr. Clark?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Martone, in your letter dated November 15th, you state, as was questioned of you earlier, that the 2 buildings are owned separately but leased under your client.
Yes.
It doesn't state here how long that lease would be held to.
My current understanding is that there are multiple year leases. One, I believe, is 5 years out, one's 7 years out. I think the idea is that should this be permitted to move forward, would be an opportunity to execute long-term leases for both, because it provides us the opportunity for uniformity to continue this process, which is advantageous for the client.
Okay, and then the next thing is, you also state in the first, really the first sentence in the parentheses, that the 2 10-foot variances for the side yard setback would be required essentially of both buildings. Is it, so you kind of allude to this, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it seems to me like you're kind of going with the fact that perhaps you're claiming that your hardship is the blended reality of the new economy. Essentially, I think in the old way things used to be, you'd own everything, and now for some economic reasons, it seems when I read in economic journals and in news accounts, that for some businesses, perhaps this one too, it makes more economic sense to lease perhaps, and freeing up capital to do other good things for the company. So is that essentially what you're saying? Because what I can see here clearly is that there is an issue, and these buildings, although they might not be owned by your client, certainly are under operation or control of your client for the term of the lease. I just want, because the hardship issue is paramount to this board.
Absolutely. And to be clear, the hardship relates to, again, because they're 2 separate addresses, they both relate to the physical uniqueness of the lots, that they are landlocked. So that is the hardship, is that both lots are landlocked to the west, and therefore it diminishes the ability to make a economically viable, feasible addition. I do agree with you in that the utility here in presenting this variance request is to provide a company with an opportunity to better use the real estate. As Marvin had mentioned, there is an interest of Witzeman and a desire and a movement to continue to make investments in the city of Troy. It had brought 153 employees to the city within the last 3 years, and is looking to lease a building that has been vacant for 8 years. And so that benefits the area, it increases tax rolls. And so I think the company looks to the situation as a good opportunity to stay in a city that it wants to continue to make a long-term growth in, and to utilize a situation where, yes, there are 2 separately owned buildings, but there is unanimity between the 2 property owners. They agreed to this, and if there was ever an issue, the agreement and the contract is that we'd have to remove this wall. It's not going to be a fight between them. That's the agreement. The wall comes down, or the breezeway comes down.
Thank you.
Are there any additional questions for the applicant? Mr. Cran?
Thank you. Getting back to your hardship and getting back to the landlocked that Mr. Lambert brought up, I'm looking at the picture and I see a parking lot to the rear of the building to the north, and there's a parking lot to the building to the south. Now you're saying you're landlocked, you can't build out anymore because there's a parking requirement for that property. But can you drive your truck from one parking lot to the other with the parts, or not?
Well, to answer that question, it's sort of twofold. One, the necessity to have parking, necessity also to comply with a rear yard setback would diminish the size of any sort of addition, and so that becomes, it's an economic utility factor where can you justify the expansion of a building to actually get enough productivity out of it that it makes sense to do that. And that's why they have two buildings instead of just trying to lease one and make an expansion. As to your question, though, is there an ability to go between the two? Currently, it's my understanding there is a fence. This breezeway would provide seamless access and transfer between the two buildings under all weather conditions. It allows forklifts to drive through there as opposed to having to load them onto trucks. It's a safer process, and we believe it would be one that would just increase efficiencies from a business standpoint.
Again, those efficiencies, safety, safety is a paramount issue of all things in Troy. But I'm trying to, our code right now looks for something with, it's a dimensional variance you're looking at. So I'm looking something dimensionally with those properties, and you explained it once, but I didn't quite sink in exactly how the dimensions of that lot make it necessary for this variance. I mean, you can remove a fence. I'm just trying to find that key. And second to that, I can see that in the future going forward, I sit on the Planning Commission, we should look at this so that you don't have to come before us for this kind of a variance. I think it's absolutely practical, logical, but we can't discuss. Am I saying something?
No,
Okay.
I'm sorry,
All right.
I agree with you.
Okay. The point I'm getting at is, could you give us that in another way, maybe, how the dimensions make it so that it affects, it's not similar to other properties of similar nature?
And I agree with you that
And if I could, at this point, I don't mean to interrupt you, but one thing I want to provide you with the option, just because of the way tonight has to flow, is that the information that Mr. Kren has asked you is actually very important. If, in order to make the best answer for your case, if you also want to take some time to revisit it and think about your answer to provide it on January 21st, please do, because unfortunately, we can't give you a final answer today. So I just want you to know that you do have that flexibility.
Certainly. Well, and at any point, whether it's tonight or on January 21st, I'm happy to answer that question. I can, give you my position as of tonight, but in the interest of brevity for the entire audience, if the preference is to save that for the 21st, I'm happy to do that.
No, you have the floor, sir.
Sure. To answer the specific question as to what's the dimensional hardship, because of the rear yard setback requirements, because it is landlocked, there is not the ability to build an addition similar in size to either of those two buildings. They need a building that encompasses the square footage of essentially two buildings. And so it's the uniqueness of the land that prohibits them as tenants, and then they act as proxy for the landholder to basically be able to expand the building to a sufficient size that they can have adequate economic utility of this particular piece of property. So that translates into the fact that they need to have two buildings, and then the question is posed, can they go around? Well, that becomes an issue, without the fence, and that becomes an issue of what seems to make the most sense economically, safety-wise. Do we load all the materials up into a truck to drive it 30 yards to then unload it, or can we do it safer with fork trucks? Some of the contracts that Witzman has are Department of Homeland Security contracts, and so there's an issue also in just maintaining security. Having parts moved in between two buildings in a uniform building provides a greater area and sense of security for that. It makes it harder for issues to arise. And so, that's not the basis of it, but that's just a consideration among the many considerations that Witzman has had to noodle over when it was making this variance request.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions? I do appreciate you coming in.
Thank you for your time today.
No problem at all. And of course, we'll see you next month on January 21st. I would just only one comment I'd make, and you may return to your seats, is I think this came up a number of years ago. It was even during a past election with different candidates running for mayor, but just echoing what Mr. Krentz said, is that with what we essentially have here is a light industrial park, and some of the uses of those light industrial parks that was normal and typical back in the 60s and 70s, times are changing. And with that, there may be some need to make them as useful as possible, whether it's for your type of operation or others, is a certain flexibility. So I agree that maybe something we have to look at citywide as a larger issue, but we can't do that tonight, obviously. But we are, I think, receptive to what you're saying. And next month, we'll probably have a few more questions, and we'll be able to hopefully resolve the issue.
Thank you for your time. Happy holidays, everyone.
Mr. Evans, I have a question. In regards to essentially tabling this issue, do we need a motion, or can we just close it out and go forward?
Oh, we should have a motion to postpone this matter
Okay.
and the public hearing to a date certain. So we should have a motion.
Okay.
We do not want to close the public hearing.
Understand. So we'd like to postpone discussion and the remainder of the public hearing, the discussion, and the final vote on this particular matter. Is there anyone who would like to make a motion to that regard? I don't think I
Mr.
really
Chairman, before we do this, I know Mr. Eisenbacher had a
should. Oh, I'm sorry,
question,
Mr.
so-
Eisenbacher.
I do have a question for the city staff. Also, sort of touching on our chairman's point of, in terms of our zoning ordinance, it has been discussed in the past when we've got the bridge that connects Somerset north and south, and that is an infringement on their front yard setback, and the bridge connecting the Beaumont Hospital inner city even between Sterling Heights and Troy. And that's another front yard setback. Were those dealt with in the same way as this? I can't remember when the hospital came up with if they needed a variance in the same manner. And I would also support getting a zoning ordinance change.
I don't know. I wasn't here with the city, nor did I research that subject matter in preparation for this meeting. We can find out, and I can report back at the next meeting if desired.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Probably to answer that question, though, the difference in that situation is that those two examples that Mr. Eisenbacher brought up have a common owner, whereas the issue we have here is we have two properties that have different owners. Is that the real reason we're dealing with the setback issue?
That's correct.
Okay.
Thank you.
And then, Mr. Chairman, before you entertain a motion, do we need to still open the public hearing for tonight, and then we would just continue it to next month? I don't know if anybody's here to actually speak on it other than the petitioner.
Oh, that's true. I actually didn't entertain that. I apologize. Yeah,
Mr. Chairman, before you do,
yes.
I think we should ask only those people that can't make next month's meeting, because anything they say tonight, I probably will forget by next month.
I appreciate that. Thank you. That is something it's kind of like meeting-wide tonight. I'd like to point out to anybody is that in general, I would just merely add is that you have the right to speak in both meetings. But if you feel strongly that your comments might have more weight next month, then it's your choice. But having made an error, I'd like to point out we do need to have a public comment section on item 4B. Is there anyone here who would like to speak on the matter who is a public member? If so, please come forward. Seeing none, I'll note for the record that we don't have a speaker on behalf of item 4B. We won't close the public comment section, but I would like to see if we can entertain a motion from the board to postpone this item until. So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Can you call the question?
Mr. Courtney?
Yes?
Mr. Eisenbacher?
Yes.
Mr. Neal?
Yes.
Mr. Krent?
Yes.
Mr. Lambert?
Yes.
Mr. Bloomingdale?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Moving onward to item 4C, Paul, could you please give us a rundown on that particular matter?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item C, as printed in the agenda, is a variance request. The applicant is Brandon Miller for Clark Hill PLC. The subject property is at 268 to 388 John R. Road. The variance request is, in order to construct parapet walls, a 5-foot variance to the required maximum 30-foot height limit. I'd like to direct everybody's attention to the overhead. I have an aerial of the neighborhood with the property in question outlined in red. This property is located right at near the northeast corner of John R. Road and 14 Mile. It's this property here. I've overlaid colors to indicate the zoning classifications for properties in the area. Now, the peach and the orange you see are our general and community business districts. To the east, the property in gray is zoned integrated industrial business, the property on the south side of 14 miles, the city of Madison Heights. Now back to the first overhead, I've circled an area in blue, and the next slide I'm going to show you is a photograph that was provided in the application that gives us a better idea of what the applicant is requesting. That photograph was taken from that entrance driveway of the subject property. And what this shows is the existing facade of the building. What they want to do is increase the heights of these facades. And this is the proposed rendering they've shown us. The city zoning ordinance limits the height of buildings, including the facades of buildings, to 30 feet in this zoning district, and portions of the facades, as illustrated here, are going to be 35 feet tall. And they provided some additional renderings as to what their proposal is going to look like. And that's the existing condition as well, just another picture from a similar location. So that summarizes the request. I'll turn it back over to the board for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Thank you, Mr. Evans. Are there any questions for staff before we bring the applicant up? Seeing none? Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Eisenbacher.
Real quick, do you know if any of the other businesses in the area have a variance? Like further north on John R., Home Goods or Kohl's or the the other store I'm forgetting.
ESW.
Yeah.
No, I don't know. Would you, I didn't research that in preparation for this.
Yeah. For the next meeting, that'd be good. That'd be.
Which, just to be clear, let me go back to the, now it might not show enough of the properties, but I know this, the one to the north, that's 400. I believe that's Dick's Sporting Goods and other businesses there. Are there any other properties you'd like us
Just
to
north
research?
of there.
Okay.
And Bed Bath & Beyond and so forth, 5 below.
Okay. Very good, thank you.
Is the applicant or representatives here? If they could come forward, please, it'd be great. Thank you. As before, if you'd state your name and then feel free to begin your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'm Brandon Muller with Clark Hill. We're legal counsel for Urban Cal, the owner of the property. I have with me today Mark Steinmack. He's a consultant that was hired by Urban Cal to speak to the variance. He's got ultimate familiarity with both the City of Troy zoning ordinance and the issues we're addressing here today as they relate to the ordinance. I'm also here with Chaz Miller and Pete Light. Pete is the general manager of Urban Retail Properties, and Chaz Miller is the construction and operations manager. I think Mr. Evans has done a great job at summarizing the variance request. I would like to take this opportunity to bring Mr. Steinmack up to
Sure.
provide some opening statements.
That's fine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. I come before you this evening primarily due to a change in the zoning ordinance that occurred a couple of years back. Prior to that time, parapets of this type, entranceways as are proposed here, were not regulated in the Troy zoning ordinance. In 2011, as part of the major rewrite of the zoning ordinance, language was added to the definition of building height that then included parapets in the definition of a building height for a flat-roofed building. At that time, these types of structures were now regulated to the 30-foot maximum height. Prior to that time, they were not regulated, and the height of the building was defined as the tallest point of a flat-roof building. Now, I can't speak for the Planning Commission and or the City Council in their reasoning for making that change to the ordinance, but I will note that at the same time, as part of a, once again, major rewrite of the ordinance, The setbacks for buildings in this district was changed from a 75-foot minimum front setback down to a 10-foot minimum front setback. Now, once again, I can't speak for the Planning Commission or the City Council, but certainly would understand that the implications of the parapet of a building with a 10-foot setback has a much greater impact than it would if it was at a 75-foot setback. In our case, with this particular request, we're in fact 670 feet back from the front property line. Now, in relation to Mr. Clark's question, and possibly to save staff some review, there are other buildings in the area that have taller parapets and entranceways that were done at a time when the ordinance would allow that without variance. Dick's Sporting Goods on the immediate adjacent parcel, separately owned, but not by my client, they have an entranceway that is at 32 foot 8 inches. Bed Bath & Beyond at the parcel on the other side of the Dick's Sporting Goods parcel, their entranceway is at 34 foot 8 inches. And Designer Shoe Warehouse, also in that shopping complex to the north, is at 32.4. Now, part of my client's intent here is to make improvements to the building. They're also trying to, quite honestly, lure some new tenants to the facility. Some of those tenants' leasing agents, when coming to the site, basically say, well, we'd like to have an entrance like the guys next door, which is part of the reason we are here this evening once again. They also, in making those improvements and trying to break up what is a 980-foot front building elevation, we're trying to do that both with height changes as well as some other treatments with materials and other things. In trying to institute height changes, we can't make the building shorter, so our only option is to make it taller. Out of the 980 feet of frontage of the building, we're asking for a variance on approximately 121 feet of that. The building has over 2,000 foot of building perimeter, so we're asking for approximately 6% of the building perimeter to be above the 30-foot height. Now, the Troy zoning ordinance, or the concept of increased building height or increased setback, is certainly not something that is not foreign to the Troy zoning ordinance. Places of worship, which you may be hearing about later on this evening, in section 6.21. Places of worship in residential zoning are permitted to have increased height as long as for each additional foot of height, the setbacks are increased by 1 foot. In our request of 5 additional feet, we're proposing to provide 125 feet of additional setback for each foot of height. Wireless communication facilities in section 6.30. The setback is required to be equal to the height in those areas where cell towers are permitted. We're providing 19 times the building height in setback. In addition, the Troy zoning ordinance does have provisions for additional height for rooftop elements if they are used as screening elements for mechanical equipment or stairways or other rooftop structures. They are permitted to be 10-foot maximum above the permitted height. They are limited to be 10% of the roof area. In our case, we're asking for 5 additional feet of height, and we're asking that it apply to approximately 6% of the building perimeter. Now, there are rooftop mechanical units there. Some of them are in excess of the existing parapet wall, but we're not here tonight to tell you that these are rooftop screens. We could go back to our mechanical engineer and ask him to put a really ugly rooftop piece of equipment there and then come back to you and ask for the screen. But that's not what we're doing here. We think this site has unique circumstances that do not apply generally to other sites within the district. We think that the request is minimal. It is not going to materially impair any of the adjacent properties and warrants your consideration. Be happy to answer any questions you might have.
The one question I would have, at least I have, and this is something that you can either speak to tonight or you can revisit next month as this opportunity exists, is it in the most succinct manner, can you expand upon what you're claiming your true hardship is? It seems to me that a lot of it goes back to the marketability of the property, and I don't know that I'm characterizing it properly. So my question is, did I just mischaracterize it, or can you clarify it?
Well, it's a number of things, and the marketability and the viability of the shopping center is certainly one of those. The other issues are the restrictions that are placed upon this site that did not apply to other properties in the same zoning district and in the same vicinity in terms of timing. If we made this request prior to April of 2011, we would be permitted by right to do what we're asking to do. And although the changes in the ordinance, once again, when taken in total regarding a new development, may be appropriate, we think that they are overly restrictive on a site like this that has existed in this manner for 30 years under the previous set of rules.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions for the applicant? Mr. Courtney?
I'd like you to repeat the height on the items north of this property.
Certainly. Once again,
which were they?
Dick's Sporting Goods.
Dick's.
Which is, shall we say, right across the parking lot from our request. They're at 32.8.
Okay.
Designer Shoe Warehouse, which is on the other side of Kohl's, they're at 32.4. And Bed Bath & Beyond, at the northern end of the shopping center to the north, they're at 34'8".
Okay. Thank you.
Any additional questions for the applicant? Mr. Krent and then Mr. Lambert.
Mr. Stymack, you gave a lot of great examples to show why it's, to me, very sensible to give the variance. But one quick thought. This essentially is a sign to me. I mean, we've got increased area for a sign. Have you looked at like the setbacks, increase of sign, the amount of wall space for a sign because of setback? Because this is a lot of setback. This is over 600 feet back. And I know we have restrictions on height of ground signs as they apply to setback. I didn't look into personally, I didn't have time actually, to see how it affects the wall signs. But usually the wall signs are square footage based on the amount of linear feet of a storefront. But anyway, that may be another reason why this variance could go through, because the extreme setback and visibility of a sign. I just thought I'd throw that out.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, respond. Yeah. Officially, the signs that are depicted on the renderings and those are preliminary. Obviously, coming soon is not a store that's being touted for a lease there. To be honest with you, we have not seen the final sign package as it relates to these sites. That's something that's still being implemented. Certainly visibility with a building that is 600 and some feet back and in fact has other retail buildings in front of it. For the tenant standpoint, that's part of the reason that prospective tenants are asking for these types of structures. In terms of the sign package and how many square feet, we have not investigated that as of yet. I can't even tell you with any degree of certainty whether the signs that are depicted on there are even appropriately sized per the Troy sign ordinance. The Troy sign ordinance, as I recall, is in fact based upon the square footage of the front of the structure. These structures may in fact add to the square footage of the front and may allow for increased sign area. They may physically also allow for a higher placement of that sign, which could be more visible from John R.
Thank you.
Mr. Lambert.
Thank you. Mr. Stymack, I don't know if you or your client are in possession of a letter that we received. It's from the owners of the 400 John R. building. They're objecting to the variance because they say it would dwarf their building, but isn't 400 the Dick's Sporting Goods store? If that's what it is, I don't know how your sign would dwarf theirs, but I wasn't sure what response you'd like to make to that letter that we received.
No, but did you get the letter? Okay.
Well, before the
provide
next
you a
meeting, we'll make
Yeah.
sure you have a copy of it.
Sure, yeah, we have not seen the response to the public hearing notice. 400 John R. is Dick's Sporting Good. The former Handy Andy is originally constructed many years ago. And as stated, their front entranceway structure is at 32.4. So if 2 foot 8 inches is dwarfing, so be it. Everyone's entitled to their opinion. Certainly, we don't think that it is going to be visible or noticeable to the untrained eye.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any additional questions for the applicant? No? Okay. I was going to mention we did receive one letter. We have not received any letters in support or any other documents against, but we'll make sure you have a copy of this. But I do appreciate you taking the time to speak to us.
Thank you.
Thank you. In opening up the public hearing on item 4C, is there anyone here who would like to speak on the matter? Seeing none, we're going to bring the item back before the board, but we're not going to enter any form of discussion or resolve the matter. We are going to have to postpone this to the January 21st meeting. I would like it if a board member could make a motion to postpone.
Mr. Chairman, before I do that, I have one more request to add onto Mr. Evans' plate
Oh,
for the
sure.
next meeting, in addition to the requests that were made for the building heights. If there's any kind of record of why the change was made in the zoning ordinance, it would seem like if a building is set that far back, to some kind of a compensation and allowing them a higher size would be reasonable in the past, and why the Planning Commission and City Council decided to make that restriction. If there's any kind of information you could provide us before the next meeting, I'd appreciate that.
Sure.
And with that, I will move that we postpone action on this until our next meeting and continue the public hearing at that time.
Thank you. Is there a second? Thank you, Mr. Clark. Mr. Evans, can you call the question on postponing item 4C?
Yes, Mr. Eisenbacher.
Yes.
Mr. Neal.
Yes.
Mr. Krent.
Yes.
Mr. Lambert.
Yes.
Mr. Bloomingdale.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Courtney.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Thank you. Mr. Evans, on item 4D, I want to make sure I understand this. Are you going to make the presentation, or is it Mr. Miller?
I'll do an overview,
And then okay.
Mr. Miller, as the representative for the city, will do a presentation.
Okay, well, please go ahead when you're ready.
Okay. Item 4D, as printed in the agenda, is a zoning ordinance interpretation. The applicant is the City of Troy zoning administrator for property at 4924 Rochester. The request is to interpret whether the proposed principal use of property constitutes a community center, a club, place of worship, or some other use under the city's zoning ordinance. I'd like to direct everyone's attention to the overhead, where again we have an aerial of the subject property outlined in red. The subject property, 4924 Rochester, the former Marinelli's Restaurant, is located on the east side of Rochester Road, south of East Long Lake. Parts of the property are also abut the side street Glazer. Now on this map I've overlaid in colors zoning ordinance classifications for the properties. Now the subject property, which is a purple color, and also property to the north and across the street to the west, is zoned neighborhood node. This specifically is in neighborhood node L, one of our form-based zoning districts. Now the property in yellow to the east is zoned single-family residential. The property in orange to the south and also across Rochester to the southwest is zoned general business. To summarize the request, in September, the City Planning Department received a zoning approval request for a proposed community center. Now, based on floor plans and supporting documentation provided by the requester, City administration determined that the community center use was permitted. Since the determination, city administration has received information from Troy residents challenging the community center zoning determination. Thus, the city manager, acting as zoning administrator, is requesting that the Zoning Board of Appeals interpret the proposed use. So to clarify, this request before the board is to interpret the proposed use. The board's not being asked to review the previous determination by the city, and the scope of your interpretation as a board is limited to interpreting the proposed use, not to approve or disapprove the proposed use for the site. Now, once the board interprets the use, city administration will use the zoning ordinance to determine applicable zoning standards based on whatever use the board has interpreted this to be. So with that, I'd turn it back over to the board for any questions.
Thank you. I do have one question. I don't think it affects anything we do here tonight, but I was wondering on page 60 of the packet, why is the application not signed? Is that because of the nature of what we're doing, or is it just something we need to do for next month?
We can get it signed.
mean,
I'm
is
not
it-
sure if it didn't show up in a digital signature or what. but-
Well, I don't know. I got that little, I think that I see that little orange or red
Yeah.
thing. It says, does I say sign here, or does that mean you've signed it? I don't know. I just, it's page 60 of the PDF.
We can get it signed, but I can attest we are in full agreement, everyone here at city administration, that that's
Sure, yeah,
a
I
legitimate
just-
request. Paperwork's filled out.
Usually it's signed and stuff, so
Sure.
I just wondered. Okay. Well, I would like the presenters to come forward if they could at this time. And again, sir, if you could state your name and feel free to begin your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Mark F. Miller, and I am the Director of Economic and Community Development for the City of Troy. And my office is here in City Hall, 500 West Big Beaver, Troy, Michigan. And I am representing the applicant. I guess I should have signed the application. It's unusual. We rarely have an application generated internally, but we'll make sure we do that. But the question is, why are we here? We're here because the zoning administrator, which is the city manager, is requesting an interpretation of the zoning ordinance, and basically that is, what is the land use classification for Adam? And that's, I'll just use that terminology for the proposed community center as Adam. Well, I want to talk a little bit about how the zoning administrator acts day to day at the City Hall. The 2011 zoning ordinance was updated comprehensively, and in that, related to the Zoning Board of Appeals, your duties were brought up to date with the Zoning Enabling Act and current case law identified by the City Attorney's Office, because the previous zoning ordinance was not current with that. Secondly, it also, and in that, it gave much more power to this interpretation arena, because this really is a rare occurrence for this board. I don't think anyone has ever seen anything like this before. Secondly, the zoning ordinance clearly identified who the zoning administrator is and what those exact duties are, because the previous zoning ordinance did not clarify that. The zoning administrator is the city manager, but from a practical standpoint, the powers of the zoning administrator comes down through me, and then I assign them to Brent Savanant, the planning director, who Paul works for Brent. So they deal with zoning administration decisions every day. Is that not correct, Mr. Evans?
That's correct.
So we have we have different levels of interaction in acting as the zoning administrator. It is not unusual for Brent or Brent and Paul to come up to my office to seek clarification and direction in an item in the zoning orders. Well, this case was complex enough that we involved the city manager through the whole decision-making process. So Dr. Amin from Adam contacted Brent Savanant, the planning director, in anticipation of trying to get approval for their use in this location. And that eventually became an official request, and we had at least 7 interactions with Dr. Amin, which including myself and also the assistant city manager and Brent Savanant, the planning director. We did include documentation of all those interactions. And as part of that, we did seek considerable clarifications from Dr. Amin, and there was floor plans submitted in there. And finally, on October 2nd, I issued a determination to Dr. Amin stating that we found that this was a community center use which potentially could have accessory or secondary uses involving prayers, because we understood that that could happen. So it was not determined to be a place of worship. It was a community center that potentially could have secondary uses involving prayer. However, after that determination was made, the city manager and city council received considerable input, causing ambiguity on the decision that was actually made. So our team got back together, including Mr. Evans, Brent Savanat, the planning director, the city manager, and we decided to then seek this interpretation because there is this ambiguity, and we felt that it was necessary to make the decision involved in the public realm so that there was transparency and that the decision would be final. So the city manager did issue a letter to Dr. Amin, which is in your packet, stating that we were seeking this interpretation from the Zoning Board of Appeals. That's why we're here today. I hope I shedded some light on how and why we're here. And I will tell you, you have a difficult task before you to do this. It's not easy. We found it difficult ourselves to come to what exactly the use is. And I know both the city manager staff and the city attorney staff is here to answer any questions or get additional information that you may require. I'll answer any questions that you have, if you have any.
I do have one. I don't think it's in our packet. I don't know that it exists, but I'll ask this, is that when you're looking at a land use that's, for example, something described as a multi-use community center, and then you have a true designated place of worship, like a church, a temple, et cetera. Is there anything in the public realm that's been published in the past that you're aware of, and it may be through, or case examples in other cities who have had probably to deal with this, where they have ever made a distinction as to where that line is on a facility that...
I'm sure there has been, but I would have to research.
Is there anything you could refer us to? Yeah.
We could do some research in that arena, yes.
Since we have to come back next month on this, it would seem logical to stand on the shoulders of others who may have wrestled with it, to be consistent or maybe useful. I was just wondering if you had seen anything. But yeah, if you can actually do that, I think we would entertain getting a chance to look at that before the next meeting. To the extent anything, if it's available. I don't know that it is, but...
Mr. Chairman,
Sure.
I would caution, however, that any information from another municipality that may not have the same ordinances as may not be relevant.
Oh, I agree. I mean, we may toss it out. I just, to me, since this is an atypical situation for us, it may be something there of value, but I agree, and I accept the caution that you're providing. I think it's a good counsel. But if there is something useful, I mean, I guess I'd like to look through it.
Okay.
Sure, thank you. I don't have any additional questions for you, but are there any additional questions from the board? Mr. Lambert.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Neal. Mr. Miller, maybe, I'm not sure if this question would go to you or to Mr. Evans. I guess deciding on which role you're each playing, you can decide who answers it. But what, number one, the history of the difference between community center versus place of worship, is that something recent as far as the city's ordinances are concerned? That's the first part of the question. And secondly, the rationale behind why a community center would have less of a setback compared to a place of worship.
Okay, first, the issue of a community center involving a significant area of prayer really does not come up very often. It's very common, though, to have a place of worship to have other secondary uses. But this was a little different. This was what was trying to be a primary use with a secondary use being somewhat worship. So that doesn't come up very often. Your second question, why the distance difference? I would have to double check for a reason why and go back on the record. I know that, as everyone may or may not know, I did work as a planning director, and I'm a certified planner, and I'm the current past president of the Michigan Association of Planning, that places of worship generally are intensive in a sense that when they have their worship, most of the Judeo-Christian, I should say, places of worship, they're very intensive when the worship happens because everyone's going at a set time and leaving. And in fact, sometimes it's so intense a traffic light may be needed at that major intersection. So I think that's why that distance required, and there's a lot of parking involved with the larger, especially since the trend is that there has been some pretty darn big places of worship these days. And so that creates a lot of traffic. And that might be part of the reason why.
Okay, thank you.
Is there a definition that we should be using to apply to the term worship facility, for example? Does it?
I believe it's defined in the ordinance.
Yeah, but
Page 78.
can you, do you have it up?
Yeah.
Can you read it? I'd like to get it in the
Sure.
record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Places of worship, as defined in the ordinance, zoning ordinance of the City of Troy, a site used for, a site used for or intended for the regular assembly of persons for the conducting of religious services and accessory uses therewith.
Thank you. Thank you. I just think it's important because the way we do our minutes now and it's all taped, I'd like to make sure that's in there. That actually answers my question. Any other questions? Mr. Courtney?
Yes. If you're contacting other cities, would you check Rochester Hills and find out what the Islamic Association of Greater Detroit has a facility there? And I know they have horrible traffic problems at certain dates because I've been by there when people have been parking on the main road crossing the street. I'm interested in, is that considered the same type of facility that we're talking about here? Whether you call it community center or mosque, either way.
Yes, and I would just clarify with the ZBA that it is not unusual, even in the city of Troy, to have traffic problems at places of worship on certain religious holidays.
Mr. Clark?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Miller, in this document that I believe your office made available, perhaps Mr. Evans worked on, I'm referring to the document, Mr. Evans, of page 76, where the yellowed area of the zoning ordinance is highlighted. I mean, whoever was involved in working on this did a very good job, so it's very easy as a lay board member to just pop in here and take a look. But I think to the chairman's comments and question, I think what we have to look at, and what I want to do is just read these couple other minor sections and then ask a question. So I see club, and I assume what, sir, you're saying is the club, since it's highlighted here, that's related to a potential community center, because that's in the ordinance. I don't see a community center listed in the ordinance, but I assume that that club means a community center, because a club or an association would own a community center. Is that first part correct?
Kind of correct.
Okay.
Okay. Club is defined in the ordinance, but community center is not. And the issue with club is that exclusively to members and their guests, where maybe a community center does not technically have membership, so we don't know. But when we made the initial interpretation, we were considering it as what commonly known as a community center, not a club.
Sure. Because it's defined as a club, just I think for my fellow board members, and I think even the public to know, in the ordinance it says, an organization and its premises catering exclusively to members and their guests for social, intellectual, recreational, cultural, or athletic purposes not operated for profit. So that, to me, sounds very reasonable as far as a free association of people, persons showing up at a particular venue on a regular or infrequent basis. Then, of course, we go down to places of assembly, which is slightly different. This is highlighted for our use as well, which says, unless otherwise identified and defined by this ordinance, places of assembly means any building structure and or grounds where groups of more than 20 people meet or are assembled. Places of assembly shall include, but not limited to, auditoriums, lecture halls, stadiums, sport arenas, convention spaces, and other similar facilities. And then there's the places of worship, which I've already mentioned. And then finally, principal use, defining what the purpose of this building's main objective is, the principal use to which the premises are devoted, and the principal purpose for which the premises exists. commonly referred to as a main use. So to me, if there is, I read the documents before tonight's meeting, it seems like, so I guess the question is, why would you render a decision and then obviously put it over on our plate that, number one, this is a community center, when it seems like, you know, it's either a house of worship, if there's 5 prayers a day offered, plus other ancillary religious talks, discussions, dialogues, or perhaps worship as in singing and so forth. But it's more either not, well, I don't see it as a club, I see it either as a place of assembly or finally a place of worship. Could you kind of go into the reads a bit for us on that?
Yes. First, on the place of assembly, those you are more of just a big open area, so we didn't really look at it from that angle. What we were looking at is that this use, and their claim was, is that it was a community center similar to other Islamic community centers that are out there. And in our review, and in the information submitted to us, there was not a dedicated area in the building for worship. And with what, in our analysis, if we look at a more, let's say, a more traditional, and I'll say a Judeo-Christian type of place of worship, usually the place of worship is very large, where the whole membership can go, and then you have accessory uses, which are, you know, from gyms, schools to halls that occur. So in our seeking of information from Adam and Dr. Amin, we really tried to clarify whether or not there was a dedicated place of worship. And in all the information we received as part, there was not one. But we also recognize that there would be ancillary prayers that could occur on the site. And that was the reason why. But, and the reasoning why the city manager then asked for this interpretation, because we kept receiving information to both the city manager and city council that provided ambiguity that perhaps this is more of a place of worship than we could ascertain from the plans which were submitted to us. So, and the city manager in our discussions really wanted me to clarify that, you know, one, we wanted to clear up if any ambiguity, and we wanted to do it in an open and transparent way in a decision made in the public, and that there be a finality of that decision. And that is the reason why the city manager, acting as a zoning administrator, requested this interpretation.
Okay, if I could just go further, and my final really area here is, I'd come back to the principal use outlined sentence here, and I did look at the documents. I don't have to go dig down further. I do believe that there was designated areas of women's prayer or women's worship. I think it was called prayer, and I believe the men had a separate area, and to me that would be indicating the principal use of that very large room within the bigger structure would be principally devoted to that particular thing. And, you know, I speak professionally in municipal recreational centers, senior centers all across southeast Michigan and really throughout the state. And I can kind of understand why this is listed here now in the ordinance for principal use. Namely, when I go to some of these centers, if oftentimes it centers around a meal, but that's not the only thing they're doing. They're doing other activities and then maybe joining for a meal. And oftentimes there's by free association, someone offers a blessing over the meal. But that prayer isn't the principal use of that building. It certainly couldn't be interpreted that there's worship going on, you know, for the thrust of what that organization's hoping to accomplish. It's simply one small piece of a much larger puzzle. But if there are rooms that are devoted to women's prayer, separately men's prayer, and we know 5-day prayer 5 days or 5 times a day, and then apparently on Friday far greater than just that, why wouldn't principal use to apply to this particular application?
In the plans we had, there was no dedicated prayer rooms.
Okay.
One follow-up question to that. Sorry, I didn't mean to step.
No, I'm fine.
And excuse me,
Sure, go ahead,
sorry to interrupt. And just the ambiguity issue is what you're starting to identify from some of the information coming forward, and that's why we wanted to bring this forward in an open and transparent way to make a final determination
Sure.
through the Zoning Board of Appeals, through the the powers that you have both in the zoning ordinance and state law.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Touching on your last statement, I think you're making the right decision, which is this is just an unusual one to resolve, and I think the more input from the city as a whole to hash through these items is smart. So I definitely agree with the approach taken by city administration. With the ambiguity of some of the drawings being different, apparently, what I keep coming back to is the language used under place of worship where it says regular assembly. Regular assembly sounds like a schedule to me. And that's something that I think through this whole process I want to make sure I understand is what are we talking about and how does that apply? What does regular assembly really mean? For me, if it's a scheduled activity of X times a day or per week is significant as it fits in with the overall decision, along with if there are designated locations in a structure.
Mr. Chair, I would like to give a story that I used in processing this.
That's helpful.
As an example of where prayer is happening, I'll give you, my brother-in-law is a General Motors executive, and they have to provide prayer rooms in the RenCen for their staff for call to prayer. So we debated, this was a tough one. I mean, is that a play in this situation? Does people go and call to prayer? Does that rise to a level of becoming a place of worship? And in the information that was provided to us, we made the determination that it was not a place of worship, that it was a community center. But as I stated earlier, as we received more and more information, we just felt that there was some ambiguity and it was necessary to bring this in a public realm to make sure all the information was brought forward and a decision was made in public.
Oh, I appreciate that. It's a good point. I can only echo, I have not seen, but my fiance is an engineer for Ford Motor Company, works in Dearborn, and their facilities like GM have exactly similar. Matter of fact, it's not any particular religion. I think they cater and make allowances for many different philosophies and faiths, and they address it because they have a large workforce. But I appreciate you making that point. Are there additional questions for Mr. Miller? Mr. Lambert?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I'm sorry if I might interject.
Yes.
I just want to remind the board that perhaps to limit the commentary associated with the questions. I'm afraid that some of the commentary may be interpreted more as deliberative. I don't want to stifle the board at this point, but if we could limit some of the commentary, that would be appropriate, I think.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Mr. Lambert?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Miller, and if the Assistant City Attorney thinks I'm out of bounds here, raise a timeout sign, but I know some of the questions that have come up that city staff looked at and we're aware of were some websites and Facebook pages that were put out there that were brought to the attention of city staff, which made the whole question of, is this a worship center or is this a community center? What reliance as a zoning board of appeals should we place on that information on these websites and Facebook pages?
If you're asking what reliance, I may defer that part of the question to the city attorney, but before that, I want to address that issue. We did ask Dr. Amin about that, and he said that those were done previously and they're in error, and that is not what they're doing going in the future. And at that time, we had to take that at face value.
Just briefly addressing social media is always, you don't know the reliability of what's out, who's saying what, who's saying. You don't even really know the identity of the person who's saying these things. I guess it's up to each individual board member to decide what kind of stock he wants to put in those kinds of things. We do have a public forum here. We have the opportunity for anyone to come forward and make a public statement. So I guess my answer would be, if you want to consider it, that's up to you. But the amount of stock you put into that sort of information would be up to each of you individually.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there additional questions for Mr. Miller? Thank you for coming up.
You're
and
welcome.
Making the presentation. It was very helpful. Moving forward now, we're going to open up the public comment section for this particular matter. Because I know a lot of you want to speak, and I'll give you the opportunity to do so. In order to just do it efficiently, we are going to work under the typical city council rules of limiting time just in order to get through the evening. We appreciate your patience in waiting. What I would ask is that you conduct yourself appropriately and just decide who comes up first and follow through. We're not going to make selections. And I'm not asking you to group yourself as to similar opinions, obviously not. I would ask that you come forward, you state your name. If you live nearby, indicate your address or just what your relationship to the matter is. And then, again, state whether you are in favor or opposed to the matter or ambivalent. And then just quickly give your thoughts. We're going to work under a time frame of 3 minutes. I would like to note that the public comment, while it will exist tonight, it will also exist next month on January 21st. Those of you who only want to speak once, you'll have to make a decision whether you think it's better to speak tonight or next month. You will be able to speak both times. I won't deny that. And if naturally you can't make it to the January meeting, then I would take advantage of this evening. Having said that, we're going to open the public comment section. And the first of you, Mr. Evans, you have something to add?
Yes, I just for the benefit of the public, Mr. Chairman, if you could point to the device on your right there.
Right there.
People, there's 3 lights. When I start the timer, a light will be green. When the middle light turns yellow, that means you have 1 minute. And then when it turns red, your time's up, and there'll be a little tone indicating that time's up.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So at this point, I'm going to request that the first of you please come up, and we'll get started. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and Board. My name is Tom Walkley. I'm attorney for Adam Community Center. I understand that there's a 3-minute limit, and I would ask the indulgence of the board to allow me to exceed that somewhat, or to allow other people to assign me their 3 minutes. There's a lot of information I think I can present to the board that will address several of the questions that were presented to Mr. Miller, and it may help smooth things through the rest of the comments.
The question I have for staff is if we were to allow him time from other parties, is that procedurally okay, or?
If there's a motion that the board would like to entertain or propose.
Okay.
That could be
Mr. Evans,
considered.
can you stop the clock on this particular item? Sir, what I'd like to do is I'd like to quickly resolve this up here, and if so, yes, but I can't, I'm going to have the board vote on it.
I understand.
So on this particular matter, is there any thoughts from the board pro or against considering what the gentleman has suggested, Mr. Courtney?
I think he should be given more time, but I think next month, not this month. To really go through the information tonight, I think we should get it next month. And if we go through it tonight, I'm going to want to repeat, or I'm sure he's going to want to repeat the same stuff again. I would just as soon hear it one time, unless there are items that he thinks won't be true next month.
Understand. Are there additional comments from the board? Mr. Krent?
Yeah, I would appreciate that the attorney speak for the crowd that's here with a little longer time, because he does have a knowledge of all the legalities of what is involved here in this opinion we're going to be making. At the same time, I would like the people in the audience that want to voice an opinion on this item, that they limit they are limited in time, but they don't duplicate what's already been said by other members with similar opinions, so that we can get through this evening at a reasonable hour. And if maybe I suggest they actually line up so we're not calling a person waiting for the next person, that would speed things up, because 1 minute times 30 is a half an hour.
I understand. Very, very good point. So as we go through this, if we could do this to be efficient, that would be advisable for all of us. Any additional comments on this particular matter before us?
Chairman?
Mr. Eisenbacher.
The concept of assigning time is something I appreciate. I'm curious how many people would be willing to assign their time, and then we make a motion for, just for the sake of expediency, I mean, if the gentleman, the attorney, speaks on behalf of the group for 30 minutes, if 10 people are not, if then everyone else wants to come up in addition, we're going to be here till 1 a.m.
In other words, I think, and to try to steer this, as we're getting a little bit out of procedure, is essentially this, is that if you, sir, can summarize and present solid information, and if that can speak on behalf of a portion of the individuals here, and they're comfortable with that, I think we could be in agreement that that would be the route we go. Of course, next month, the public comment will be available for those individuals that feel like perhaps you missed something. They'll have an opportunity. But I think what we're trying to do is gauge a little bit of how much time, how efficient can we be, or are we just going to increase the meeting length?
Well, I understand, and perhaps, if I may, maybe the solution is I will try to stick to the 3 minutes. I wasn't going to exceed it by 30. It was only going to be maybe like 5 to 6, 7 minutes, but I know that I couldn't get it all in 5.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just say that this is kind of new territory that we've never gone down. I appreciate the gentleman's most recent comments. You know, look at what is being potentially proposed here, that one person could walk in the door at any future meeting, not just this one, and have unlimited time, you know, for hours and hours because they, pull up a bus load of people outside and they wave and then they can go home. I mean, that doesn't make a lot of logical sense to us. But on the flip side of the coin, Mr. Miller is the applicant representing the city, and under normal circumstances, the center would file the application. But on the balancing act with the attorney here would be that even if an applicant comes before our board, they don't have unlimited time. At a certain point, the chairman, through his discretionary power, can say, well, you've already said that, or we need to sum up, or we need to wrap up at this point in time. So at that point in time, the applicant's representative needs to, you know, have a seat, and then it comes to the board. So I think that, you know, in light of the fact that this is kind of a different way of conducting, I would maybe support 5 minutes perhaps for the attorney, and then wrap that part up. And then, of course, hopefully people aren't going to come up and echo every single comment you made, but I think that makes a lot more logical sense to me. Because there has to be a stop point.
Appreciate that. Mr. Bloomingdale?
I concur in what Glenn just said. I would say the gentleman has said he believes he can summarize his statements in 5 to 6 minutes, and I think we should grant him the 6 minutes.
Any additional comments, or anybody, member of the board, interested in making a motion to the effect? Mr. Krent?
I'd like to give the attorney 10 minutes.
Okay. Is there a second? Support? Support. Okay. We have a motion to give the attorney who represents Adam 10 minutes, and it's been supported. Could you please call the question, Mr. Evans?
Mr. Neal?
Yes.
Mr. Krent?
Yes.
Mr. Lambert?
Yes.
Mr. Bloomingdale?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Courtney?
Yes.
Mr. Eisenbacher?
Yes.
I think what we'll do, and if you don't mind, I mean, with the option we can do is we can, I don't know, Paul, can we adjust the timer so he can see the same lights and do 10 minutes, or run him through 3 times or something? Or?
It's right there.
Yeah.
Oh, he did it. Okay.
I think I was able to do it for 10 minutes, so we'll give this a shot.
All right. Well, you'll get those lights, and you're on, sir.
Okay, and I hope to be completed by then. But my name is Tom Walkley. I represent Adam Community Center. I've submitted a memorandum in support of the use. I believe the board has had it and hopefully had an opportunity to review it. So I'm not going to reiterate everything that's in there, but in light of some of the other materials that you've received recently, I think I need to clarify some things, explain some things, and perhaps even counter some things. First of all, Adam is a charitable organization, and that's the phrase I'll use, is Adam. There are 2 components to their mission. They were formed to do 2 things. One is community center, community good works, whether that be social, intellectual, cultural, recreational. There was going to be training and education. That was their goal. That's what they were set up to do. And a second component of their mission was to create a place for worship, a place of worship. And they tried to act on that. 3-4 years ago, they tried to buy church property in Sterling Heights, and I believe also in Troy. And for a variety of reasons, those deals did not go through, part of them financial, and they realized that they could not support and create a place of worship But what they could do is still do the community center, the community good works, and that's what they were set up to do. And I'll present the board with copies of their articles of incorporation that speak to that. That's what they set up in 2009. So they wanted to continue doing the good works, and that is what the community center is intended to be. It is not a mosque. It is not a place of worship. There will not be the call to prayer. There will not be large congregational prayer meetings. This is a small, oddly shaped building. People aren't coming to this building as a mosque. If they're looking for a mosque for prayer, large congregational prayer, they're going to go to IAGD on Auburn Road, the International Association of Islamic Association of Greater Detroit. I apologize. Or other mosques in the area. They are not coming to this building. The members of Adam, there's not hundreds and thousands of them. There's just a few, I think 50, 60 people, families that are involved here that are contributing to this. They will worship at other places as well, including IAGD. That's a beautiful building. The Marinelli's building is intended to be rehabbed, renovated as this community center. I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but I'll address one question that was raised by Mr. Clark. And there are not separate women's and men's areas of worship, as I understand it. And the drawings that I have seen and the drawings I believe that were submitted to the city do not contain that. There is a material supplied to you by someone objecting to this use that superimposed those sorts of things on the drawings, but that was not from Adam. The building, when Adam tried to act upon their sort of two-pronged mission, when they tried to buy the building in Sterling Heights, they created a website. That website is addressed also in the objections, okay? And I'll get to that in just a moment. Should this use be allowed? I believe it should. It's consistent with the zoning ordinance. It's not prohibited, and the uses that Adam will engage in there, the activities they will engage in, are similar, if not identical, to many of the other uses and activities that are taking place in the neighborhood node L currently. They're going to be doing classes and educational activities. There's reading and math tutor businesses in the area. They're going to have recreational and instructional classes. There's dance studios, et cetera, in the area. This is going to be more akin, frankly, to an office building, a place of assembly, or even a club. And I believe all of those uses are permitted in this NNL district. Again, there will not be large congregational prayer. There will not be the traffic problems that have been alluded to with respect to other churches in the area. In fact, this facility, as it's proposed, will have very little impact on the area at all, and certainly less than the Marinelli's restaurant did. It will not be open late hours, 1, 2 in the morning, serving alcohol. You will not have the fumes and odor from the cooking and preparation of food, or the waste and removal of the garbage. It will have very little traffic for most of the day, week, month. It will have very few people there, except to attend presentations, classes, discussions, et cetera. So the traffic will be minimal, and certainly less than Marinelli's, which in its heyday certainly had waiting lines to get in Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday night. Will there be prayer? There will be incidental prayer. There will be prayer probably before meetings here and there, just as many other groups and associations do. That doesn't make them a place of worship. In fact, I'm aware of certain cities, when the city council meets, they start the meeting with a moment of silent prayer. That doesn't make that city council or that city building a place of worship either. I'm going to try and cut right to the misleading information I think you've been presented. I don't think it's false necessarily, all of it, but some of it is misleading. And some of it is this Islamic directory, the Facebook page, the website. The Islamic directory, it's called Salatomatic, I believe. Adam did not set that up. It is false. They are not a mosque. They didn't create this. Someone else put it up there, and it's not accurate. Now, the response in the materials you received from the opposition is that you have to be a registered user to do that. Well, anybody can be a registered user. I went to that website today, and I printed off their registration page. Anybody here could go home tonight, become a registered user, and claim that this city hall is a place of worship as well. It's not accurate, and it doesn't apply. The website, I brought it up earlier, that is when they were created, they were trying to purchase the church property in Troy. So all of the pictures and all of the references there are relating to the church property on Merrill Street in Troy. They never completed that deal, they never operated there, they never owned it. Okay, unfortunately they left the website up, which has led to some confusion, but they are not a mosque, they don't have a place of worship. The Facebook page, part of it is also taken out of context. There is a photograph on the Facebook page of someone standing before a group and giving a presentation. That's not an imam leading a congregation in prayer. That is just someone who was presenting a scholarly topic to the people. It was a picture taken out of context and presented to you as somehow indicating a place of worship. Also, there's a fundraiser page that was presented to you from their Facebook page. That's accurate. There is a fundraiser. They're trying to raise funds to acquire property where they can build a place of worship. That's not something they're trying to hide, and they still intend to do that somewhere down the line, but it is not here in this location. I would also like to address some of the comments the opposition made about the plans submitted to the city, and this is where I think things cross the line a little bit. The plans submitted to the city by Adam clearly call for separate, they're showing how it's carved up into different rooms, okay? It did not indicate male and female worship areas. That may have been in the church that they were trying to do before, but that is not in this location. It talks about a 12,000 square foot prayer hall. That's not, the Marinelli's building is nowhere near that, and the rooms that it's divided up into are a bookstore, offices, recreation area, a youth activity area, and a cultural gathering area. Some of the things that they intend to do there are cultural activities, social get-togethers, wedding receptions, community education, youth groups, etc., physical exercise. It is not intended to be a place of worship, and I know I keep harping on that, but that is the key. One of the other things that the opposition pointed out on the plan submitted to the city is that they were going to replace the carpet, and that somehow this indicated that because Muslims have to take off their shoes before worship, that's why they're replacing the carpet. And frankly, it's just not logical. It's a 40-year-old run-down restaurant building that's grimy and greasy. Anybody coming in, even if they were going to keep it as a restaurant, was going to replace the carpet, the ceiling tiles, and everything else. The fact that Adam is dividing this property up and partitioning it into additional offices and rooms requires them to remove this. They can't remodel it without removing the carpet. They're going to remove the ceiling tiles. They're remodeling or renovating the bathrooms as well to make them handicap accessible and ADA compliant. They're probably putting a ramp in there as well. All of that is going to be done regardless. It has nothing to do with religion or culture. One other thing that I would like to present to the board, and this is to counter some of the corporate documents that were presented, and that is the Michigan Annual Report filings that indicated that Adam is a place of worship or an Islamic center, etc. And Mr. Dufresne, I'm not sure how we should do this.
If you could give them to Mr. Evan. Thank you.
Now, so some of the corporate documents from Adam were presented to the board, and one key document was not. And this is what will be presented to you right now. And this is the Articles of Incorporation that were filed back in, I believe, 2009. And it states the purpose for which this corporation is organized. And I'm quoting, "To establish a center for increasing knowledge through proper research, education, and training in the community for the youths and adults. To establish peace through proper guidance, to establish a homogeneous atmosphere for all ethnic groups." That is the stated purpose. There is also a continuation on an additional page that sets forth their mission statement to include swimming pools, community functions.
You wrap up in about 15 seconds?
I sure can. The final things I would say is that what is the primary use? The primary use is not as a place of worship. It would be, let's change the facts a little bit. Let's take St. Anastasia here in Troy. I was a member for many years. I know it well. If they had purchased this building to use as a community center, it would not be a place of worship unless it was their primary use. So I don't think it wouldn't be a primary use for them. It shouldn't be considered a primary use for Adam. And I would also say that back in the 90s, Reverend Kowchek from Anastasia had theology on tap up at Marinelli's. It didn't make it a place of worship, and I don't think it should be a place of worship now.
Thank you. Appreciate you summarizing the situation. Continuing forward with the public comment, we're not going to be asking questions of obviously individuals who are speaking, but if those of you would like to speak and you'd like to come up now, please do. We'll be resetting to the 3-minute mark. If you could form a bit of a line or a gentleman or lady agreement as to how you flow up, that would be great. Hate to have to police that, but who would like to speak on this matter? Please come forward. Evening, sir. Don't be shy. Just state your name and your relationship to it, and then go on forward. You'll have 3 minutes.
Yeah, I'll keep it less than 3 minutes. My name is Sarwat Siddiqui, and I'm a resident of Troy since 2000. I strongly support this place. My wife and my 3 kids go there and they enjoy. It's a very good community place. I own in Troy 3 houses and paying approximately $17,000 taxes on it. So that's all I want to say.
I understand. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Who else would like to come up? Evening, sir.
My name is Javed Surti, and I am resident of Troy for last 10 years. And one of the good thing about this city is I was attending the school seminar, and they informed that this is the second diverse city in, I don't remember it is in Michigan or in America. So allowing community centers and diverse activities that will make more diverse, and it will allow community to integrate. So I strongly support any activities because I know that long-term planning, that they offer services for not only one community, but all communities. Like I know in other cities, communities like that, they allow the medical services for all community, not for specific to Muslims. So this will not benefit to only Muslims. It will be for all communities, and that will make entire community healthy. It will not impact anything. So I strongly support this. And I work in the Ford, and they allow the these activities, and they allow to integrate, and that creates the healthy environment, and that builds the relationship among the multiple community. Because I came to America, and this is the country where I can see the diversity and justice not anywhere in the world. So in Troy, I'm happy and one of the lucky person to live in the Troy and see all of this activity. And I'm happy that we are able to practice not only talks, but I can see a lot of walks on that. So I will appreciate if any decision goes to this kind of actions.
Okay. Thank you. Next speaker, please. Hello, ma'am.
My name is Ruth Turner, and I've been a resident for 37 years of Troy. And my son actually used to work at Marinelli, so I can attest to the fact that it would need renovation no matter what you put in there. But I wanted to point out a couple things that there, for instance, in schools and at universities, and also at hospitals, there are prayer rooms, or what they call reflection rooms. When I was a scout leader, we started every meeting, which was in a school, with prayer. We often ended with prayer. Every banquet had prayer, but that was not a primary use of the building or even that event. And then I also wanted to point out, too, that even if we were to say ongoing or regular prayer constituted a principal use, if you think of something like the Elks Club, every event that's held there, at a certain time in the evening, they stop and they don't call it prayer, but it's a period of contemplation to remember those who have fallen every single event and every single night. So, there's a precedent that's already been set, even within our own city. Okay?
Thank you, ma'am. Next speaker. Come on up, ma'am. Good evening.
Good evening. Hi, my name is Siddiqa Hussain. I live in Troy, 2266 Radcliffe Drive. First of all, I want to thank you all for coming here on behalf of Adam Community Center in this busy season, and Merry Christmas. We need this.
You can adjust the microphone. You just grab it, pull it down.
Yeah, we need these community centers, especially for our children. And this is a great city, Troy. Many people are coming from surrounding areas to settle in Troy. And most of us are professional, and we are American citizen. Our children are born citizen, and they are learning this American culture, and on top of it, we want them to learn their ancestors' culture, the way of life. So I humbly request, please allow us to have this community center. It's in your hands. Thank you again for letting me speak.
Sure, thank you for speaking. Who else would like to come up next? Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening. My name is Donna Pizeshki. I live in the Raintree Subdivision, 1605 Oak Crest. And I just have a question for the board. What difference does it make if they pray there or not? I know many people, like I took a Bible study class, and they're always getting together in each other's homes, praying every Friday or a certain time. Since when is prayer? I mean, what's wrong with it? Does it mean you can't have that building there because the zoning ordinance says you can't have a place of worship? I mean, why are we even asking this? That's what I want to know. And I have no objection. I mean, it's not a bar. There won't be accidents from alcohol. They're not selling drugs. They're not having all the problems we have with the hookah places. It's great to have a place to go and study and learn new things. I think it's wonderful.
Thank you, ma'am. Evening, sir.
My name is Latfi Saleh. I live in Troy here. Actually, in Islam, we pray 5 times per day. At my home, if I'm not well, I'm praying 5 times per day. That means my home is not a worship place. If we are in the garden or outside in any gathering, right? So when the prayer time comes, we do prayer. That means that the park is not a praying place. So I'd like to emphasize on when we are in the community center, when we are doing any activity, when the prayer time come, in Islam, we are recommended to pray on time. So praying on time does not mean that the place we are sitting in is a prayer or a worship place. I'd like to clarify this point, right? Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Next speaker? Come on up, sir. Good evening.
Ahmed Ismail, good evening. I live in Troy for 19 years, going into my 20th year. This whole thing started with what I understood that we need an interpretation of what the place is going to be used for. 90% of the discussion that I heard is calling it worship place. I don't know if this is fair or not, because really, it could be one of the possibilities. I heard the club and I heard others. I also heard the timing thing. I understand that everything has to have a time and limit, but it's not fair just because we have larger number of people to start with timing before even, and I do thank you for asking what is the census in the crowd. We were putting even limits before we know how many people ask questions. I'm afraid that somebody comes in and then uses here, and somebody say, oh, this is about Islam. Because prayer, any one of you can be sitting right now and doing prayer. The fact that we do prayer in a different way does not eliminate, does not make this a major thing. Prayer is prayer. This is not an Islamophobia situation where the whole thing turns against Islam, and I'm sure of that. I'm afraid of misunderstanding of my own community. So please don't get me wrong. This whole thing is turning around. What's a prayer? We do our prayer. You can do a prayer while you're sitting. Do you disagree? Does anybody disagree with me? Can you do your prayer now? Your religion tells you to do your prayer this way. So the fact that you sit any place in the world, nobody can stop you. Our religion tells us, are you going to discuss, if you would like to discuss how would Muslims do their prayer, or how would it impact it, so please find a consultant to the board for this issue who understands Islam and can speak about that. But the rights for us, just like anybody else, hopefully it is preserved, and we're looking forward to do this. And instead of kicking us out of Troy and start to leave, we all have high-income individuals and families, and we're all educated, very highly educated, so please consider that we're also part of the community. We want to blend in, not get out. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker. Evening, sir.
Good evening. My name is Dr. Alam. I'm a scientist in Fiat R&D. I think the only issue is the traffic. That was the main reason whoever has filed the application against it. As far as the prayers are concerned, everybody prefers to go for when the main congregation goes to IAGD. Lives in that area. I'm a member of ADAM as well. The main role which I am seeing it will play, not only the Muslim community, but in general. Recently, I gave a lecture over there. It's mainly about the youth. We know we have drug problems. We know what problems we have. I investigate those issues. Definitely, if this center will come up, youth will have less drugs because they will get lectures over there about it. They will get consultations about it. Youth will be in less active criminal activities because they will be involved in constructive activities. So this role is going to play. As far as the worship is concerned, they have already mentioned, if we are there, we'll pray. But practically speaking, I'm right now coming from work. You see the badge over there. In summertime, the prayer times that we have, it's not going to clash with any business. Nobody goes there. I'm not going to go in the lunch hour to pray over there. I'm not going to go after my work to pray over there. For 4 months, from 15th April to 15th August, everybody goes once, which is around 8 o'clock for 10 minutes. You're not going to find more than 10 cars. In the winter time, they will go around 8 o'clock, 8 p.m., not for more than 10 minutes, even if they go just only for prayers. That's all. Nobody goes 5 times over there, even if it's a place of prayer. The main traffic will be on Saturdays or Sundays when we have 20 or 30 cars in the parking lots. If they are bringing their kids for the classes, parents drops them and they go back. I prefer to take my kid over there as well because I want to avoid the traffic in IGD. So I can assure there will be no traffic issues, and nobody is going to pray 5 times over there, even if they're just going to pray, because it's not feasible for us, for 50, 60 members who are professionals, to leave their work and go and pray. It's going to be once in a day, even if they go for pray and for 5 to 10 minutes. So I appreciate whatever decision you make. Thanks. Have a nice day.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker, sir.
Hi.
Evening.
Good evening. I'm kind of, all right.
Don't worry about it. It's no problem. Just
I'm a senior in Troy Athens High School, and I went to Troy Athens since junior year, so I've been there for 2 years, and every Friday we would take one of the classes and, we'll go pray the Friday prayer, just 20, 30 minutes. And although Troy High School is a public school, a lot of diversity in it, but they grant us the opportunity so we can pray for 20, 30 minutes, and we're very thankful for this. Yeah.
Thank you. Good job, sir.
What's his name?
Sorry?
For the record.
Oh, sir. Sir, young man, just for the record, we just need to have your name, and I don't believe
My name is Ahmed Saleh, and this is my dad, the green shirt.
All right. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Who else would like to speak on the matter? Come on up, sir.
Good evening, board members. Thank you for hearing me for this few moments. My name is Donald Cook, and I am a colleague of Dr. Amin, who is one of the principals of the Adam community. And I have dealt with him for probably the last 20 years. And in the course of our business dealings, I have had the opportunity to speak with Dr. Amin on many subjects, the majority of which are engineering related. But on occasion, we have gotten into the attributes of his community and what they do. And I am familiar with his community center. I've been invited to many events. I know that the majority of events are educational in nature. And I, as a resident of this community, would feel strongly the fact that I would love to have a community of individuals that are gentle as they are. They don't drink, they don't swear. They're not a rowdy bunch by any stretch of the imagination. And the fact that in our discussions, We've never had, or he's never once mentioned that this is a place of worship. This is strictly a community center. The fact that there is incidental prayer, I would also have to say and concur with the others that the fact that I am also been part of the Knights of Columbus, that we also do prayer, but that's not a place of worship. I also been on many airplane flights when I see many people that have prayed that we get up and down safely. But in any event, I wanted to stress the point that in the many communications and discussions that Dr. Amin and I have had in relationship to the community center is that I would see this as strictly a very viable and a very a well-meaning intention group to bring their individuals together and also to discuss and bring communities like the Christian community and the Islam community together as well, Muslim community. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Another speaker, anybody? Sir, please come up. Good evening.
My name is Hassan Chowdhury. I live in 714 Barclay Drive, Troy, Michigan. And I'm a member of the Adam Community Center. I run a school. It's a language school, language plus ethics and citizenship. When we started renting a place in the Troy Community Center. Then we found out that the place, there is a one room. They used to provide a one room. That is not enough. Then we used to rent the rooms from the Larson Middle School. Then the amount of room we needed actually that is very expensive for us. It takes about $10,000 to $15,000 a year. So we couldn't afford that. Now we are starting offering the class in Adam Community Center. So we want to continue that because of this is a language, because of that kind of the language we speak. It is not taught in the school. The culture we are related to is not taught in the school or anywhere else. So we want to give our children the culture we belongs to, the language we speak it at home. We want to give them, and also other cultural diversity we want to give them. So also we have a monthly get together in our Adam Community Center. So we want to bring our kids so they know they know their parents. So we want to mingle with them so they know each other, and we have a sense of build the community. So the Adam Community Center, what we are supposed to do, intend to do actually, we need that kind of building, and we cannot afford a large building, anything to buy it right now, the financial condition we have. So I want to urge everybody, all council members, to accept our request. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Is there another person who would like to speak on the matter? If so, please come forward. And again, if you kind of anticipate when someone's going to end, be up close, that'd be great. Hello, sir.
Mike Comartin. I live on the street. And when I caught wind of this, I wanted to get here to the meeting this evening. You know, I'm all for community centers, you know, something that will help youth do constructive, good, healthy habits. However, at the end of the street, I don't think that the building is really equipped for something like that. The occupants, traffic. Right now, it's congested now with that Kroger that just went in, which will just bring even more traffic in place with that community center. With Marinelli's there, it was kind of mellow. It was relaxed. And not to mention, when I was in the backyard, I'd have that fresh smell of bacon being cooked. You know, didn't mind being out there. But needless to say, I'm opposed to this community center. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Is there another individual who would like to speak on the matter? Sir. Oh, I'm sorry. Evening, sir.
Good evening. My name is Kent Clark. I live at 675 East Maple Road. I'm opposed to this center, but I have a question for the applicant, who I believe stated in their presentation they would like to have had a mosque someplace. They've tried one or more times to get a mosque, and I would like to know whether the applicant intends to acquire more property so that they can make this center a future location for a mosque, assuming they can acquire the appropriate property and the appropriate zoning or other use indicia that they need to turn this into a mosque. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Is there another party that would like to speak on the matter? Sir? Looks like there's a couple. No, you're fine, sir. I think you're on your way.
Thank you for the
Good evening, sir.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I'm Tim Ferrison. I own the property and the business adjacent to the property that we're,
To the
that's a
south,
question.
north, or?
It'd be to the north. Be to the north. In fact, the property rests right on my property line. I believe that was just checked recently again because I see your orange sticker up there and everything. You know, first of all, you know, I don't want it to make it sound like I'm discriminatory in any way about these fine folks.
Pardon me
okay?
for a moment. I'm sorry. Hey, Mr. Evans, I don't think the clock's running. Okay, thank you, sir.
Okay.
Please continue.
This is not an issue for me as far as being Islamic, any different than it is if it was Baptist, Christian, Methodist, or whatever. When I'm right on the property line, it has a perception by looking at my property to make it easy for you to understand. If it was going to be a Catholic church there, I would look like the convent. That's how close and tight the property is. You know, the attorney for the folks, you know, chose to go with the 2009 filing, I think, when they incorporated, but just recently, and I shared this with you, I'm not going to go through all this stuff that you have, but, you know, just recently as the 24th of October, I believe it was. Is it October 24th? Okay. Was it October 24th? It looks like October 24th. I can't see the date now. My eyes are failing me. It's indicated on the filing for the nonprofit corporation as a worship place. That's not my words. That's from a director, the treasury of the organization. Okay? It's a worship place. 4 days later, I believe it was September, by the way, 4 days later, or 6 days later, the representative of the Adam Community Center says it's not a place of worship. But it was 6 days ago, by the way. It was 6 days ago. Prior to that, in 2012, the filing states that basically it's an Islamic center for practice of Islamic religion and prayer place. Just two more sheets, okay? In 2010 and 2011, there was nothing. It says it's a nonprofit, it's a mosque. That's written on the form and signed, by the way. And of course, as you probably saw in the documents, it's classified as a church by the IRS based on their submission of documents. It's classified as a church or affiliated with a church. You know, the sites that were mentioned that nobody had anything to do with, I suppose that somebody that didn't have anything to do about anything took the picture from Facebook and put it on a Solomatics site, okay, because they wanted to. I don't know why they did it. Someone had to do it. Someone had to be registered. Someone put it on there. I can take out my iPhone at this moment and show you where in October they updated the Adam Community Center, and by the way, it's listed as a mosque on this site as well, okay? And it has a timing for prayers, but the prayers weren't updated since October 31st.
Time's up, sir. I apologize.
Okay. And the fact that they have activities around prayer. The facts will speak for themselves as far as the document. If I could just say one thing, okay?
I'll give you
If I can gain the differentiation of the facility from my facility, I would be willing to take a look at it. If there was another way to gain differentiation other than the 50 feet that's required by the place of worship. Okay.
Thank you, sir. Is there another party who would like to speak on the matter? Thank you for speaking, sir. Please come up, sir. Good evening, sir.
Joseph Zrenchik. I'm the realtor that brought this property to the attention of Adam. And I've seen the Adam Community Center being developed as it's going along. I thought the purpose of this meeting tonight was to just see if we could define what constitutes a community center, and does this fall within that definition? Or what constitutes a place of worship, and does this fall within that definition? This wasn't to be a discussion of I object to the use of this or object to the use of that, because this is in an area that is zoned for a place of worship or is zoned for a community center. And we're just simply trying to answer the question that was been posed by the city representative: is this a community center or is this a place of worship? Either one is acceptable according to the current zoning on that property. So I think, what are we to accomplish here? Are we to make a determination if Adam does fall within the determination of being in the definition of community center or a place of worship? And I think that is the task that's been laid before the council, nothing else. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Would someone else like to speak on the matter? Thank you, sir. Come on up. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. My name is Robert Cornwall. I'm the pastor of Central Woodward Christian Church, and I'm also the convener of the Troy Interfaith Group. And so I just want to speak just in broad terms of the importance of respecting religious beliefs in a community like ours. We're a very diverse community. We don't all agree on our theologies. But I think one of the things we need to do, we're kind of drawing fine lines between what is worship and what is non-worship, what is prayer, and when prayer is acceptable or where it's going to happen. Anytime a religious community gathers in a building, it's likely that prayer will happen. Whether it's a large-scale worship experience is a totally different issue. I live in the neighborhood. I walk by that building regularly. It's going to be used for something. A restaurant is a fairly busy place. A community center in which there is some prayer happening, perhaps during the day, when there is instruction happening, likely will not be any more different than a restaurant. The businesses in the area are not going to be probably impacted once we see how this all plays out. But I just want you to be aware of and encourage you to take in consideration that we are a diverse community and that we need to respect that. I'm a Christian, but I participate with many different faith communities and represent them in a way. And, but I do know that there's a lot of concern about our Muslim friends in the communities around the country, but my experience has been very positive. And I just want to encourage us to be welcoming to everyone in the community. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else would like to speak on this matter tonight? Ma'am, please come forward. Good evening, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Ruth Ann Dolly. I live in Rochester Hills, and I'm just a concerned citizen. I am very aware that everyone has a right to worship their own faith, their own God, and I certainly would agree with our Constitution, and I don't know if all these people are citizens, but that doesn't even matter. What the question before the board tonight is, are they worshiping there? The definition of worship, actually the root of the word comes from the Old English word worthship or worthscrip, meaning actually alliterated to worship. So the idea is to what or who are we saying is worthy of our praise or adoration, our worship, our time, our treasures, our talents, And in no way am I saying these people aren't good. That's not the question before the board. It's a legal issue of, is worship taking place there? I've done some research and just to find out their own Islamic definition of worship. And I have prepared some packets for the board that I'd like you to look at your leisure time. Nothing to go over tonight, but I just would stress that the idea is not, the item in question is not the goodness of the people, their activities as far as teaching their children character. I know that they want a community center. We do have a great community center in Troy, swimming pool, basketball courts, and all that. So it's not the idea of needing space for recreation per se. The only other thing is I wonder the idea of community center, if someone were to walk in, say, dressed inappropriately, what even I would consider inappropriate, say tank top, mini skirt, or if a guy had a can of beer in his hand or something, would that then negate the term community because those people wouldn't be welcome because of their activities or how they were dressed? So I just have that question for before the board too. And I have prepared 7 packets, but Mr.
You could provide them to Mr. Evans, and then he can disseminate them.
If you could address the chair.
And I'm afraid your time has expired.
Mr. McGowan had the other.
Thank you, ma'am. You're out of order, ma'am. You're out of order, ma'am. You are. Is there someone else who would like to speak on this particular matter? And then the quick answer, many times before City Council and other boards, non-city residents have spoken, and I'll allow it. And is there anyone else who would like to speak on a particular matter? If so, please come forward. Seeing nobody, sir, please come forward. Thank you. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Thank you for letting me speak. My name is Anwar Hussain. I am a resident of Troy for the last over 21 years. I like to first of all say that this is one of the best cities because I lived in different parts of the Michigan. I was in Kalamazoo, I was in Ann Arbor, I was in Lansing, and finally I decided to settle in Michigan. My kids are born and raised over here, and they are in college right now. And the reason we went to community center, what happened, all my kids are born over here. I have 3 sons. One is graduating from University of Michigan Medical School this year, one is going to medical school, and one is in 10th grade. And they forgot all the basic culture we have where I came from. And community center is a place where you can rejuvenate that culture. Of course, prayer comes, and that any community center that with our background you go to, there will be a prayer timeline posted. Because when prayer time comes, one of the obligations we have, we pray on time. So that's the reason we always post prayer time in any center you go to. So my request to the City Council will be, Troy is one of the most diverse cities, as my previous speaker has mentioned, and we like to keep that way. This is one of the best cities in the, I'd say in the whole USA that more diversified. I felt more comfortable in this city living as a resident of Troy, more comfortable and more freedom than where I came from. I always tell my friend that I brag about Troy. Troy is so diverse. I never felt discriminated. I've always felt this is part of my motherland, and I like to keep that way, keep that Troy diversified, and please approve the request for community center. Thank you again for listening.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your time. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on this matter tonight? Sir? Please come forward. And forgive me for asking, but have you spoke already? Or, and I don't know, after a while, everybody, you know, I get
I'm
confused.
the only one with this.
Oh, okay.
Book, right?
Good evening, sir.
Good evening. My name is Amin Hashmi. I'm a Troy resident for 13 years now. Raised 3 kids in Troy School. great school system. Before going into my own thought about it, I've been involved in the city for a long time. I'm part of Troy Interfaith Group, Bob Cornwell talked about, and then have been involved in some of the politics also. Been a member for Vision 2020 for Troy, so Troy is pretty close to my heart. I found today, I was talking to a lot of friends. I had one of my friends from Troy Interfaith send me an email. She wanted to come personally, but she could not because she had an injury, knee injury. So she sent me an email. She just wanted to pass on thought about this community center. Can I read that from your permission?
In your time frame, sure.
Yes, sure. She said, this is what she's going through. Her name is Elaine Tokarski, and she's saying, Dear Troy members of the zoning committee, I regret that I'm unable to be at this meeting in person due to knee injury, but I asked Mr. Hashmi to read my letter. My name is Elaine Tokarski. I am and have been a resident of Troy for 40 years and a member of the Troy Interfaith Group for 5 years. My religion is Roman Catholic. We, the Troy Interfaith Group, have spent several years visiting each other's place of worship and learning about what each religion teaches. Knowledge and understanding are wonderful ways to not only open one's mind, but one's heart to be able to say, hello, my friend. I support the request of our Troy area Muslims to have a chapel-like community place. So what she gave me an explanation that in Roman Catholic there's a church and there's a chapel, which is a kind of makeshift worshiping place. So she's terming it as a chapel, not a full-fledged mosque or full-fledged church. There's no doubt in my mind that if their requests were accepted and I was driving by their place, got a flat tire and my cell phone was not working, I would be welcome given the use of their telephone and offered hospitality until the tow truck came and I had a ride home. I support a yes vote on their request. That's one friend. And another one is Paula Talarico. He sent me an email. Actually, it was sent out to us. And he's saying, I'm unable to attend the meeting regarding a proposed Muslim center, but as a long-time resident of Troy and a business owner, here I am in favor of such a center. So I have two friends, pretty close, Troy resident, supporting this. And I just want to say at the end that it's a diversity. Troy is the second most diverse in Michigan, and we would like to keep it like that and enhance its stature and its perception around us. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on the matter tonight who have not already spoken? Well, it looks like we've kind of given everybody an opportunity who wants to speak tonight. And as a reminder, we are not going to deliberate and discuss and make a decision on this. And as a matter of fact, come January 21st, which is our next scheduled meeting, which will occur at 7:30 p.m., it's a Tuesday, the public comment section will again be available. And at that time also, we'll be able to resolve the matter, I believe, and give some guidance to the city. I do want to thank you all for coming tonight and letting us go through the other cases that were before you. What I'm going to do at this point is I do believe I need to see if I can entertain a motion from the board to postpone this matter.
So moved.
So moved. Is there a second? Second.
That's to January 21st regularly scheduled meeting, correct?
Right, 7:30 p.m. Yes. If you, when available, can call the order on that or the roll, that'd be great.
Is that, excuse me, just to clarify, the motion maker was Mr. Courtney with Mr. Clark seconding?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. Mr. Krent?
Yes.
Mr. Lambert?
Yes.
Mr. Bloomingdale?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Courtney?
Yes.
Mr. Eisenbacher?
Yes.
Mr. Neal?
Yes.
Motion passes.
That closes item 4, which is the hearing of cases for this meeting. Moving on to item number 5, which is communications. I have no communications to bring forward. Is there anything from staff, or is there a board member that has anything in particular? Seeing none, I'm going to move into miscellaneous business, and my understanding is we don't have any. And Mr. Evans, Ms. Dufresne, do you have anything? No? No. Regarding public comment, we do have a section for public comment that is unrelated to a particular matter in the sense of a hearing or a case. I want to make it available to ask if there's anybody who wants to speak on anything that involves zoning in general. You have the opportunity to come forward. It's up to you. Honestly, you might be the first person I've ever seen do it if you do. But seeing none, we're going to move on to item 8, which is adjournment. We're going to adjourn this meeting tonight. Thank you for your patience in coming forward. And for those of you who want to come, the next meeting again is January 21st. It's a Tuesday, and it'll start at 7:30 p.m. right here. Thank you.